The hens were gone. The truck was gone. Walter Jensen's boots were still by the back door, but Walter wasn't. Hundreds of miles away in the industrial heart of Detroit, Harold Morgan stared at a rusted engine block on the banks of the river. He hadn't touched a car in months, but he still wiped his hands on an oily rag every morning, like muscle memory. His kids were gone too, sent away. He didn't say where. This isn't how the American dream is supposed to end, but in 1930, for millions of American families, that dream became a nightmare. And what made it worse wasn't a hurricane or a war, it was a vote, a signature, a tariff. But first, if you enjoy these stories, they try to erase, but we're committed to tell, you're at the right place. That's what we do here. History drops 2 new episodes a week, so if this is important to you, like and subscribe. Walter Jensen had never left Iowa. He didn't need to. The farm had been in his family since before statehood. 4 generations of egg farmers passing down land, tools, and calluses. Walter rose before the sun every day. He fed the hens, packed the crates, and delivered them to the rail yard, where buyers would ship them north. Many headed to Canada, where demand kept his farm afloat. Not luxury, but security. He used that money to pay the mortgage, buy feed, and keep the kids in school. Ruth, his wife, baked bread from scratch every Tuesday and taught their daughter how to sew. At night, Walter would sometimes read aloud from the Des Moines Register by the fireplace, his youngest curled up beside him. Harold Morgan in Detroit had never seen a chicken coop. He was a carman, line worker at Packard Motors, hands black with grease, knuckles nicked from bolts, but he had a steady job, a modest house, and 2 sons who thought the factory whistle was the sound of safety. When Harold came home at night, Anna had dinner ready. Cabbage stew or sausage and onions. They'd listen to the radio together, mostly jazz, some big band, maybe a baseball score or 2. Life felt steady, familiar. But that was before the crash, before everything changed. When the stock market collapsed, the ground beneath them began to shake. Within months, bank runs began. Farmers like Walter couldn't get loans for seed. Factory orders dried up. Foreclosures skyrocketed. Unemployment surged. In 1930, Americans were desperate, and desperate men in Washington clung to a very old idea. Raise tariffs, protect American jobs, seal the borders from foreign goods. That's when Senator Reed Smoot of Utah and Representative Willis C. Hawley of Oregon stepped forward. Smoot was a senior senator and devout Mormon. Hawley was an academic turned lawmaker. Together, they drafted legislation to raise tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. President Herbert Hoover, despite fierce warnings from economists, backed them. Over 1,000 economists signed a letter begging him to veto it, but Hoover waved it off. Tariffs, he claimed, would build American prosperity from within. On June 17, 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act became law, and the results were almost immediately catastrophic. Walter's Canadian buyers canceled all orders within days. Retaliatory tariffs hit American agriculture products hard. Egg exports to Canada, once 12 million annually, collapsed to just 170,000. Walter had no other outlets. Local markets were already drowning in supply. Prices dropped below the cost of production. He tried bartering with neighbors, eggs for flour, eggs for coal, but soon people couldn't even spare that. The bank came for his truck, then the tractor, then the land. His daughter Emily remembered the night her mother found him outside, sitting in the barn, staring at the hens. He hadn't spoken in hours. The barn lantern had gone cold. In Detroit, Harold lasted a few more months, but retaliatory tariffs from Europe cut off car exports. Assembly lines slowed, then stopped. He was laid off in January, so were 2,000 others. Harold pawned his wedding watch, sold his boots. His youngest Sam was diagnosed with pneumonia, but they couldn't afford a doctor. Anna tried to keep the family together, but when the foreclosure notice came, she wrote one letter to her sister in Flint. Take the boys, feed them if you can. Harold and Anna moved into a Hooverville near the Detroit River, shanties built from crates, scrap metal, and hope. A newspaper reporter called it a city of ghosts. In winter, frost formed inside the shelters. Harold saw a man freeze to death sitting up. No one noticed for hours. Nationwide soup lines stretched for blocks. A New York charity ran out of bread and had to turn away 500 hungry men. Children scoured alleys for potato skins. Schools closed. Hospitals shuttered. Between 1929 and 1933, U.S. exports dropped by 61%. Imports dropped by 66%. Countries that retaliated saw U.S. trade drop by as much as 32%. At least 24 nations imposed beggar-thy-neighbor tariffs in return. The global economy seized. The U.S. unemployment rate hit 25%. That's 1 in 4 Americans out of work. Entire towns vanished. Farmers abandoned their land. Banks collapsed. And yet Washington stayed the course. Hoover called it a temporary setback, but voters disagreed. In 1932, America rejected Hooverism. Franklin Roosevelt won in an historic landslide. Republicans lost 101 House seats and 12 Senate seats. Hawley, the tariffs co-author, was rejected by his own party. They refused to even nominate him. Smoot, the powerful Utah senator, was thrown out of office after 30 years. The lesson had been learned the hard way, but the scars remained. Walter Jensen never returned to farming. His wife Ruth took in laundry. Emily became a teacher, but she never forgot the night they sold the family Bible to buy flour. Harold Morgan never worked another factory line. He died in 1942 penniless in a Detroit boarding house. His boys didn't find out for 3 weeks. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act didn't cause the Great Depression, but it poured gasoline on the fire. It isolated the U.S. from the global economy when partnership was most needed. And it turned an economic crisis into a humanitarian one. But there's another part of this story, one that comes decades later and from within the same political party. In the 1980s, a different kind of Republican entered the White House. Ronald Reagan understood what Herbert Hoover had failed to see. He had studied the lessons of Smoot-Hawley, and he made it his mission to turn the Republican Party away from tariffs and toward free markets. Reagan believed that economic walls didn't protect nations, they isolated them. So he began dismantling barriers. One of his first acts as president was eliminating import quotas on shoes from developing nations. And more importantly, he looked north to Canada. The very country that once bought Walter Jensen's eggs was now central to a new vision for global cooperation. Reagan negotiated the first U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, laying the foundation for what would become NAFTA. He believed prosperity wasn't a zero-sum game, that when trade flows freely, nations rise together. In a 1986 radio address, Reagan said, "Our trade policy rests firmly on the foundation of free and open markets. The freer the flow of world trade, the stronger the tides of human progress and peace among nations." In his memoirs, Reagan named Smoot-Hawley directly, calling it a disaster. "I am a free trader," he wrote. "I firmly opposed import quotas." Reagan's message wasn't just to Republicans. It wasn't just to Democrats. It was to America. Don't repeat the mistake. Because history doesn't just repeat, sometimes it warns. Tariffs may be very easy to impose. They may feel like strength. But when we wall ourselves off from the world, we don't just hurt our trading partners, we hurt our people. Walter, Harold, Ruth, Anna, their stories are buried in the dust of the 1930s. But their pain was real, their losses were real, and their story, this story, is a warning.
New episodes drop twice a week only on Heath's Story. If you'd like to support the channel, subscribe now, leave a like and a comment, and become a member by clicking below.